the bags were found to contain marijuana.
Now, did you also perform analysis on the white powder that I just showed you?
Yes, I did.
And can you describe the testing that you performed on that powder?
Yes, the test that I performed on the bag of white powder, as mentioned, is the UV test, the FTIR test, and the GCMS test.
And when you performed that test in your training experience, were you able to conclude with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty what substance was contained in that substance?
Yes, I did.
What substance was that?
Phenacetin.
Was there anything else in that substance that you recall?
Yes, there was.
What was that?
Lactose.
Now, with respect to these findings, do you generate a report that documents your findings?
Yes, I did.
You're on my approach?
Nay.
My approach?
Yes.
I'm showing you a 2-page document. You take all the time you need to look up when you're done? You recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize? What do you recognize about it?
It is the certificate of drug analysis pertaining to 15-05564.
And what is 15-05564 to you?
That is the laboratory number pertaining to this case.
And does it also have other identifying information relative to this case?
Yes, it does.
Including the defendant's name
Yes.
and police CC number?
Yes.
Are your findings written on that?
Yes, they are.
Now, with respect to, is that your signature on the second page?
No, that is the notary public's
Is
signature.
that your signature on the first page?
Yes, that was my signature.
You're on secret with this almost
Objection.
Yes, as we agree with your discussion.
And as I previously indicated, I will report the rule of objection. Maybe not.
142 was marked, correct, sir?
Now, the source, I notice that signature is for Sarah Clark, is that right?
That is correct.
Is that your maiden name?
Yes, it is.
Congratulations. Now, with respect to the marijuana, did you also have a chance to weigh the marijuana?
Yes, I did.
How do you do that?
So you remove the substance, in this case vegetable matter, and you put it on an analytical balance, and then whatever weight is there, that weight's recorded.
So it's weighed outside the packaging, whatever packaging it was in.
That is correct.
Now, do you recall the weights of the marijuana in this case?
I would need to refer to my notes.
I'm going to show you Exhibit 142 again, first certificate. Can you please read the weights as you recorded them?
So the weight of the 2 bags of green vegetable matter, the 2 plastic evidence bags, item 1, the weight of the tested vegetable matter was 893.55 grams. The 2 bags, the 2 heat-sealed plastic bags of green vegetable matter, item 2, the weight of the tested vegetable matter was 55.62 grams. And then the green vegetable matter in the non-plastic bag and the heat-sealed plastic bag, item 3, the weight of the tested vegetable matter was 11.78 grams.
And that's the last item, item 4.
The bag of
My
white...
apologies, can I withdraw the question there? Did you also weigh the white powder
Yes, I did.
with the same procedures?
Yes, I did.
Could you please read your weight as recorded on item number 4?
The white powder in the plastic bag, item 4, the weight of the tested powder was 28.44 grams.
Thank you. Any questions?
For us.
Good morning.
Morning.
Did you test any other items of marijuana, that suspected marijuana related to this case?
Could you repeat that question?
The items that you just went through, Mr. McCarthy, do you have an understanding where those items came from?
The only information I was given was the information that was recorded on the SB 295 that was filled out. That's the only information I have.
Do you remember what that information was?
Well, there should be a photocopy of that SB 295 form in the case file, as well as some of that information is on the header of the certificate of drug analysis.
Do you have that with you?
I have a copy that counsel provided.
What?
I have a copy of the case file that counsel provided.
Does that indicate where the various bags of marijuana came from? Do you have that with you?
It just describes basic case information, like what's being submitted and subject name. That's all I'm given.
May I take a look at it? May, please. May I put you in the day? Show you a document from that packet you just showed me, correct?
Oh, what was the question?
This is the last page of that packet you just handed me, correct?
That is correct.
And this is something you would have reviewed prior to doing the testing of the Erick Savilke, correct?
That is correct.
And there is a subject that is related to these particular items, correct?
That is correct.
And it was Shaun, is that correct?
That is correct.
Did you do any analysis on any subjects that any Laura and you took together?
I wouldn't know unless I had the case file in front of me. Well, I analyzed almost 3,000 cases.
I know it's asking a lot. The item number 4 that you looked at, the loose pattern, it indicated between lactose and acetone. Is that, am I saying that close to right?
That is correct.
Then lactose, is that a controlled substance?
It is not.
And acetone, is that a controlled substance?
It is not a controlled substance.
They're not in class A, B, C, D, or E, correct?
That is correct.
A, typically see heroin in class A, is that right?
That is correct.
Cocaine in class B,
That is correct.
class C being oftentimes pharmaceutical pills and things of that nature.
Sometimes, yes.
And what else?
Diazepam is a class C controlled
Sorry?
substance. Diazepam,
Okay. Class D, typically marijuana. Class E, typically.
alprazolam, for instance, is a class. Alprazolam is a class E.
And you don't know.
Redirect. Thank you. You're excused.
This time I'm going to call Erick Savilke.
The testimony you shall give to the court and the jury and the issue between the Commonwealth and the defendant shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Good morning, sir. Proceed, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, in a lack of voice, could you please introduce yourself to his honor and members of the jury, spelling your last name for the record? And maybe the first name as well.
Yes, my name is Erick Savilke. First name is spelled E-R-I-K. Last name S-A-V-I-C-K-E.
What do you do for work, sir?
I'm a criminalist 3 with the Boston Police Department Latent Print Unit.
What does the title Criminalist 3 mean?
My duties include processing of evidentiary items for the presence or absence of latent impressions, documenting those observations and reporting out those observations, as well as analyzing and comparing any latent impressions that are recovered to known individuals, and reporting out those observations, as well as responding to crime scenes when called upon.
What sorts of education have you received?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from Suffolk University and a Master of Science in Biomedical Forensic Science from Boston University.
What was your first job in the field of science?
Beginning with the Boston Police Department, or
Before the Boston Police Department, where did you work?
so prior to the Boston Police Department, I worked at the Boston Medical Center as a pathologist assistant within the anatomic pathology section for 4 years.
And then when did you start with the Boston Police Department?
I began working for the Boston Police Department in 2009.
What was your first title then?
I was a forensic technologist in the crime laboratory unit within the trace evidence section.
And when did you make a transition into the latent print unit?
I began processing for the latent print unit in 2009. I officially transferred into the latent print unit in 2011.
What sorts of training did you receive specifically with regards to latent prints or fingerprints?
So I went through an internal training program that began with the processing of evidentiary items. I had to answer comprehensive questions in the field of processing techniques, fingerprints, photography. I then shadowed a competent examiner for a period of time, took a competency test, and then had my own casework shadow for a period of time. Once that was completed, I then began the comparison training program, again, which answers comprehensive questions in the field of fingerprints. I completed approximately 19 practical exercises that include analyzing and comparing unknown fingerprints to known fingerprints. Took 3 competency tests, and then had my own casework shadow for a period of time.
Have you received any training outside the law school department?
Yes, I've had over approximately 500 hours of external training from outside agencies in the field of fingerprints, crime scene processing, as well as photography.
And what sorts of places have you received training from?
Generally attending conferences, annual conferences, private companies that will come in and give lectures or trainings within the field, as well as attending private companies to see the lectures and trainings.
Is the Boston Police Department Latent Print Unit accredited?
Yes, we are.
And what does that mean?
The accreditation process is a voluntary program. It's through ASCLD Lab, which is the American Society of Crime Lab Directors Board Lab Accreditation Board. It's a company that will come in and essentially audit the unit. They're going to look at our standard operating procedures. They're going to interview all the employees or the analysts within the unit. They're going to pull case files of each analyst and review those. And they're looking for over 400 criteria that we have to abide by that they set forth, along with abiding by our own standard operating procedures. So essentially it's an audit for the unit that they come in looking for those criteria.
Turning your attention now to the subject matter that you have, you work at the Boston Police Department, latent print unit. Can you describe what a latent print unit, or what a latent print is?
So a fingerprint is the recording of the friction-rich skin, or that raised portion of skin that's found on your fingers. That friction-rich skin is also found on the joints, palms, and soles of your feet. A latent impression is an impression that's left behind on a surface that's generally invisible to the unaided eye, meaning we need some type of processing technique or some type of chemical technique to help visualize that. They're approximately 98 to 99% water, so they're chance impressions as well as being extremely fragile.
What are the types of processing do you perform in order to enhance a latent print that's been left behind?
So depending on the type of surface the item is, we generally separate it into 2 separate surfaces. So non-porous surfaces, or surfaces that don't absorb water, so metals, plastics, glass. That will be a general visual examination. We will then superglue fume that item, and by superglue fuming, we'll place that item into a chamber. We'll place some superglue on a heating plate and heat that superglue up. Once that superglue becomes heated up, it becomes a vapor and will adhere to any moisture that's on an item. So since fingerprints are 98 to 99% water, we're hoping that it applies to that surface or that residue. It will then help preserve it to that surface, and then we can conduct another visual examination. We can then apply a dye stain to that surface that will adhere to the superglue and use an alternate light source to help visualize any impressions that may be there. On the porous side, or papers, untreated wood, cardboard, where that material is being absorbed into the surface, we're looking for that 1 to 2% of the fingerprint. And we have various chemicals that will react with amino acids within the fingerprint to help process those types of evidence.
Now let me just turn to the comparison part. What are the things that you look at on a latent print to determine whether you can compare it to a known fingerprint?
So when we first look at a latent impression, we're going to look at 3 levels of detail. That first level of detail that we're going to look at is what we call the ridge flow. So we're going to see, can we see a general pattern type? So everyone has some combination of a loop, whirl, or arch. And a loop is when the ridges enter one side of your finger, loop in the middle, and exit out the same side that those ridges enter the finger in. Your whirls are where the ridges make a circular pattern, kind of like a target or a dartboard. And then your arches are when the ridges enter one side, make a little hump in the middle, a wave in the middle, and exit out the opposite side of the finger. So we're looking at, can we determine the pattern type? Can we determine what part of the finger it came from? If it came from an actual fingertip, a joint, a palm, Can we orientate it in the correct up and down position? So we're looking at all of those just at level 1 to try to determine that. Next would be that level 2 detail where it's a little further into the ridges themselves, so the ridge path, what those ridges are actually doing as they flow through the fingerprint. So they're not just going up and down straight across. They're going to break into two or split into two like a fork in the road, or what we call a bifurcation. They may come to an abrupt end, or what we call an ending ridge, and then the ridges surrounding that will collapse in to fill the void. And then we may have single ridge units, or what we call dots. And we can have combinations of these three basic level 2 details. And then the level 3 detail that we look for is the ridge shape and the pore shape. So along the ridges you have your pores that secrete the residue that gets left behind for a fingerprint. So we can look at the various shapes, the sizes. The ridges themselves have different thicknesses as they run along the pattern itself. So we're going to look at a combination of those 3 levels of detail to determine if it's even suitable for a comparison or suitable for an identification.
And there are specific areas, let me just turn to the hands. What part of the hands typically have ridge detail?
So the whole portion of your hand, so the fingers or the first joint where you will see your patterns, the joints themselves, as well as the palm of the hand will all have that friction ridge detail.
Those are, when we say left impressions, you're essentially when something's touched, potentially could leave essentially a portion or at least some part of that latent on that object, is that right?
Yeah, so if you touch an item, it's possible to leave an impression of the ridge detail behind on that surface.
Turning your attention to this case, and I think Your Honor, this might be a good time for the instruction. Did you process any items in this particular case?
Yes, I did.
And what were you asked to process?
Jurors, this is a good time for me to instruct you with regard to the following testimony concerning fingerprint evidence. You will likely to hear that the police had access to Shaun Harrison's fingerprints. You are to draw no negative inferences against Shaun Harrison from this evidence, like photographs that the police obtained from various sources, so too did the obtaining of fingerprints from various sources. These sources include prints from people who are obtaining taxi or taxi cab licenses or firearm licenses, or from employers who require fingerprints for identification purposes. Therefore, you should not and cannot draw any negative inferences against Shaun Harrison from this evidence. Proceed, please.
Thank you. Sir, what items did you, let me start with guns. Did you examine any firearms for latent prints?
Yes, I did.
I'll show you this item, sir. Previously marked as Exhibit 81. Do you recognize that object?
Yes, I do.
And what is that object?
This was item 11 that was submitted to latent print unit for processing.
And what did you do to process that?
This item was previously suitably fumed, either by our crime scene response unit or our detectives, who are both trained and have chambers in each district as well.
Objection, move to strike the last charge or
We have other district courts as well, overruled. Not responsive, but.
The item was processed by the district detectives, is that right?
I'm not sure who actually suitably fumed the items themselves.
But when it arrived in your lab, were you able to examine it?
Yes, I was.
And what condition was it when it arrived in your lab?
When I first got it, I conducted a visual examination and documented that it was previously suitably fumed based on the appearance of whitish tin portions of the firearm itself.
And were you able to find any latent prints on that particular item?
No, I was not.
I'll show you what's been previously marked as exhibit number 82. You recognize that object, sir?
Yes, I do.
And what is that object?
This was item 13, a firearm that was submitted to the Latent Impression Unit for processing.
Okay. And what condition was it when you received it from when it was submitted? Had it been previously super glued as well?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And were you able to make an examination of this particular item?
Yes, I was.
Did you find any latent prints on this particular item, number 82?
No, I did not.
Here, sir, previously marked as 121. Recognize that object?
Yes, I do.
And what is that object?
This was item 38, a firearm that was submitted to the Latent Impression Unit.
Was there also a magazine as well?
Yes, there was.
And cartridges as well?
Correct, yes.
And what condition would they you received that item?
These items were, again, previously super fumed prior to the submission to the Latent Impression Unit.
And did you make an examination of those three items, exhibits 121, 122, and 123?
Yes, I did.
And were you able to find any latents on those items?
Yes, I was recovered one latent impression off the magazine.
And that would be item 123, is that right?
Correct, yes.
And with regards to that, so that's the first step to see if there's any latent prints on any of the items, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
What is the next step you take to determine whether or not you can make an examination of that item 123 for a comparison?
I would look at the images that I had taken of that latent impression and look for those three levels of detail to determine suitability, or if I could even move it to the comparison stage and compare it to a known individual.
Okay, and were you able to make a determination whether that latent was of value?
Yes, I determined that it was suitable for identification purposes.
And what did you do next?
I then had known individuals where I compared side by side that latent impression with those known impressions that I had had.
And were you able to make a determination of whether or not those known individuals were the source of that particular latent print on item 123?
I had not. I was inconclusive with that latent impression against all the individuals that I had to compare.
And who were the individuals that you were asked to compare any found latent prints to?
I had known prints for Mr. Shaun Harrison, Dante Lara, a Oscar Pena, a Wilson Peguero, and a Matthew Palacios. Yes, I do.
What was that item?
This was item 39 that was submitted to the Latent Impression Unit.
Okay. And were you able to make an examination of that item?
Yes, I was.
Did you find any latent prints on this particular item?
No, I did not.
Items 44 and 42.
Sorry, Mr. Bradley.
Boston Police evidence items 44 and 44.2. Previously marked as exhibits, 133 and 134. Recognize those items?
No, I do not.
I'll show you an item, Boston Police item number 48, previously marked as exhibit number 118. Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
And what is that item?
This was a Goodwill plastic shopping bag, item 48, that was submitted to the latent print unit.
Okay, and did you find any latent prints on that item?
Yes, I did.
And what were those? What was on those items?
I had recovered one latent impression off of the bag.
Okay. And was that latent print of value?
Yes, it was.
And were you able to make a comparison between those, the latent prints of the known 4 people that you're asking me to comparison to, and the latent that you recovered from that bag?
Yes, I was.
And what did you determine, based upon your experience and training, what was the source of that latent print?
In my opinion, latent 48A off of the Goodwill bag was identified as being from the same source as the right little finger of Mr. Shaun Harrison.
Was there any other, there was only one latent print found on that plastic bag, is that right?
That's correct.
I'll show you a box, previously marked as, this entire box was marked as number 75. Recognize that. Number 75.
No, I do not.
I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as number 425, sir. You recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And how do you recognize that item?
This is item 44.1 that was submitted to the latent print unit, which is an ammunition box with the associated plastic ammunition tray.
Okay. And were you able to determine whether or not there were any latent prints on that particular item?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And you, in fact, find any latents on that?
Yes, I did.
How many latents did you find?
On item 44.1, which is the ammunition box, there was one latent recovered. And then item 44.1-1, which is the plastic ammunition tray, there was also one latent impression recovered.
And when you say 44.1-A, if the particular item, that box, when it was submitted, was the tray was inside the box?
I don't recall if the tray was actually inside the box, but they were submitted together under one item number. and I had sub-itemized the ammunition tray as 44.1-1, so I could distinguish it as I processed the items.
And you found latent prints on which item, the ammo box or the tray itself?
I found one latent on both the ammo box and tray.
Okay. And were you able to make a determination of who was the source of that based upon your training and experience?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And what did you find?
For latent 44.1A, it was in my opinion that latent had originated or was identified from the same source as the left middle finger of Mr. Dante Lara.
And what about the one 44.1-1A, the tray?
That latent impression I determined to be of no value or not suitable for identification purposes.
I'll show you this from previously marked as number 126. You recognize that item, sir?
Yes, I do.
And what is that item?
This was item 43.1, which is another ammo box with the associated plastic ammunition tray.
And were you able to make a determination of whether or not there were latent prints on that?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And how many prints? Did you again test both the box and the tray in this one as well?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you find any latent prints on the box?
Yes, I did. There was 2 latent impressions recovered from the ammunition box.
And what about the tray?
There were 8 latent impressions recovered from the plastic ammunition tray.
And were you able to find or make a comparison for those 8 impressions on the tray and the 2 on the box to the 4 individuals that you've been asked to make a comparison to?
Yes, I did.
And based upon your experience and training, were you able to determine who, in your opinion and your training, left those impressions?
Yes, I was.
And who was that?
Item for latent 43.1A, in my opinion, was identified as the same source as the left thumb of Mr. Dante Lara. Latent 43.1B, I had determined to be no value or not suitable for identification purposes. For latents 43.1-1A, it was in my opinion that identified from the same source originated from the right middle finger of Mr. Dante Lara. Latent 43.1-1B, again in my opinion, was identified to the right middle finger of Mr. Dante Lara. Latent 43.1-1C, in my opinion, was identified as originating from the same source as the left ring of Mr. Matthew Palacios. Latent 43.1-1D, in my opinion, was identified as the right middle finger of Mr. Matthew Palacios. Latent 43.1-1E, in my opinion, identified from the same source as the right middle finger of Mr. Matthew Palacios. Latent 43.1-1F, in my opinion, was identified as the same source as the right ring finger of Mr. Matthew Palacios. And the remaining 2 latent impressions, G and H, I had determined to be no value and not suitable for identification purposes.
So I'm going to show you what's in the previously marked as number 124. Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
This was item 45.1, again, an ammunition box with the associated plastic ammunition tray.
And again, were you able to make a determination about whether or not there were any latent prints on those particular items, the tray and the box itself?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And based upon your training and experience, were you able to individualize those to anybody of the 4 named people?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And based upon your experience and training, who did you individualize those to?
So in the ammunition box, there was 2 latent impressions recovered. So latent 45.1A, there was 4 latent impressions recovered off the ammunition box. Latent 45.1A, in my opinion, was identified as the left index finger of Mr. Dante Lara. And the remaining 3 latent impressions I determined to be of no value and were not suitable for identification purposes. There were 6 latent impressions recovered off the ammunition tray. Latent 45.1-1A, in my opinion, was originated from the same source as the left palm of Mr. Dante Lara. 45.1-1B in my opinion, was identified as the left middle finger of Mr. Dante Lara, and the remaining 4 latent impressions I had determined to be of no value and were not suitable for identification purposes.
Yes. Just need a brief moment, Your Honor. Okay, question, Your Honor. All right. I'm going to show you. Now, in the course of this examination of items that were processed, did you process in plastic bags?
Yes, I did.
And how were those bags brought?
The bags were submitted to the latent print unit in paper bags, and then they were placed into boxes to be stored within the latent print unit.
And what did you do in order to examine these plastic bags?
I would take those, the boxes that the items were in from our evidence vault. I would then document the packaging through photographs and notes, as well as once I open the items itself, document those through photographs and notes.
I'm going to show you what's been previously marked. It was 103. Do you recognize that item, sir?
Yes, I do.
And what is that item?
This is item 35 that was submitted to the latent print unit, which consists of 5 plastic heat-sealed bags.
And did you process those 5 heat-sealed bags?
Yes, I did.
And did you find any latent prints on them?
Yes, I found 1 latent impression off of one of the bags.
Okay, and that latent impression, was that left in such a condition that you can make the comparison to?
Yes, I determined that it was suitable for identification purposes.
And were you able to make a determination of between that latent print and the 4 individuals?
Yes, I was.
Okay, and what was your conclusion based on the training experience?
In my opinion, latent 35A was identified as originating from the same source as the right middle finger of Mr. Shaun Harrison.
You just made a published brief for this item?
Why don't you just hold it up while we're...
I'll now show you what's been previously marked Exhibit 104. That's Boston Police Item 42. Did you process that particular item as well, sir?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and what did you do to process that item?
I conducted a visual examination of the item. I super glue fumed this particular item, and I applied a dye stain to that item and conducted another visual examination.
The dye stain is to help enhance any latent prints that you can use photograph and make comparisons to.
Yes, it's to help create contrast with the background color of the surface itself.
Okay, and did you find any latent prints on that item?
No, I did not.
Okay. Show you what's been previously marked Exhibit number 98. Do you recognize that item, sir?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and what is that item?
This was item 52, which was another plastic heat seal pack.
And did you process that item?
Yes, I did.
Did you find any latent prints on it?
No, I did not.
Okay, I'm going to show you some previously marked Exhibit number 102, which would be Boston Police Evidence item number 59. Did you examine that item?
Yes, I did.
Did you find any latent prints on that item?
No, I did not.
I'll show you what's been previously marked Exhibit number 101, Boston Police Evidence item number 60. Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and how do you recognize that item?
On the outer packaging, which is sealed, are the case information along with my initials, and then the item itself also has the case information in my initials.
Were you able to find any latent cell value on that?
Yes, I was.
Okay, and was those latents, how many, sorry, strike that, starting again. How many latent prints did you find?
There was 1 latent impression covered off of that bag.
Was that latent print of value or suitable for comparison?
Yes, it was.
Did you make a comparison between that latent print and the 4 known individuals?
Yes, I did.
Based upon your experience and training, were you able to make a determination of what the source of that particular latent print was?
Yes, I was.
And who was that?
In my opinion, latent 60A, I was identified as originating from the same source as the right middle finger of Mr. Dante Lara.
I'm going to show you what's been previously marked Exhibit number 100, Boston Police Evidence item number 61. What is that item, sir?
This was a plastic, clear plastic full top bag or sandwich bag.
And were you able to process that item?
Yes, I was.
Did you find any latent prints on it?
No, I did not.
Show you what's been previously marked exhibit number 97, Boston Police Evidence number 62. You recognize that item?
52 or 62?
62.
Sorry, 62.
You recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
And were you able to process that item?
Yes, I was.
Did you find any latent prints on that item?
No, I did not.
And finally, I'm going to show you what's been previously marked exhibit number 99, Boston Police. Exhibit piece of evidence number 63. You recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize that item?
I did. My initials are on the outer packaging, which is sealed, as well as on the item itself.
Did you examine those?
Yes, I did examine this item.
And were you able to make a determination of whether or not there were any latent prints of that?
There were no latent prints recovered off of this item.
So I'm going to show you some previously marked exhibit number 87, which is the packaging indicates it's Boston Police evidence number 15. Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize that?
My initials, along with the case information, are on the outer packaging in which it's sealed.
And were you able to examine those items?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And did you find any latent prints on those items, sir?
No, I did not.
Nothing further.
Cross.
Thank you, Judge. Just to clarify something, Ms. Pratt asked several questions about making a comparison between 4 known people and the print that you may have recovered. Was it 4 or 5 people that you were comparing to?
It was 5.
So, when any time that Mr. Bradley said 4, you're really meaning 5, is that correct? And that's those 5 people are Shaun Harrison, correct? Matthew Palacios, John K. Lara, Mr. Figueroa, and Mr. Payne, correct?
Correct, yes.
Thank you. There were some items that were submitted that you were told not to examine, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And that was at least 5 items, is that right?
I don't recall the number of items
Well,
that was.
Wait a second. Well, items that you didn't, do you remember what any of those items were that were submitted that you were told not to examine?
I believe there was some cartridges along with a knife as well.
Yeah, but around this. Let me show you the document, just take a look at it, and it has to be recognized.
Yes, I do.
One of the reports that you generated as a result of the evaluation of the evidence in this case.
Yes, it was a processing report.
Right, and does this refresh your memory as to which items you were asked not to examine?
Yes, so at this time, these items that were listed,
Items 35, 42, 59, 60, and 61.
correct, they were asked to not be processed at that time. They were processed later on.
And which items specifically were those?
Items 35, 42, 59, 60, and 61 were all processed.
And what were they?
I believe they were all plastic bags.
And was there one of those plastic bags that you looked at earlier, that made reference to earlier?
The 5 were item 35, and the other items listed, I believe, were single plastic bags.
Now, you said that you recovered a print from a Goodwill bag, correct?
Yes, I did.
Of the items that were submitted to you to be evaluated for presence of fingerprint evidence, were you given a Goodwill receipt dated 2012?
No, I was not.
And the fingerprint that you found on the Goodwill bag, can you tell me when that print was put on that bag?
No, I cannot determine when the fingerprint was left on a surface.
Can you tell me where on the bag it was?
Looking at the item, I can locate the latent print itself, yes.
It's a chocolate.
Latent 48A was recovered, this particular towards the top of the bag itself.
On the outside.
Correct, yes.
There are any number of ways that that print could be put on that bag, isn't that fair to say?
Yes, anytime you handle it, there's a chance to transfer your impressions.
So I handed that bag to you, and then you went off and used it, my print might well be on that bag.
It's possible it could be, yes.
Did you check the inside of any of those bags for prints?
And so the inner portions of the bags were processed, yes.
Find any prints related to anybody, is that fair to say, on the inside of the bag?
On item 35, that latent impression was recovered from the inside of the bag.
And that, when that print was put on,
No, I do not.
or how old it was, or even where it was when the print was put on.
And the location of the latent print itself. So again, if I see the bag, we mark where the latent impressions are recovered from, along with photographing the overall location. And so I would be able to locate where it is on the bag itself.
But you couldn't tell me where it was, where that bag was when that print was put on.
Correct, no, I cannot tell.
Now, the various ammunition boxes and trays, you found some prints on those, right?
Yes, I did.
And you never found any prints that were related to Mr. Palacios, Mr. Pizarro, correct?
That's correct, I did not.
And none related to Mr. Payne.
Correct.
And you never found any of Shaun Harrison's prints that you could identify on any of those bags, correct?
That's correct, I did not.
When you asked to examine a plastic, large plastic cup or Tupperware type of conical item,
No, I was not.
were you ever asked to, have you discussed with us all of the items that you examined, whether you found prints on them or not?
But for this particular incident number, yes.
Anything related, you didn't examine any other items related to this case other than ones that have already been discussed here this morning, correct?
There were other items submitted under a separate incident number that I was asked to process.
You know what incident that was?
The actual incident itself, no.
And all the, everything related to this incident that you received, you've discussed here this morning, correct?
Correct, yes.
Thank you, Joe.
Mr. Carroll, I'll ask you a few questions on the process about not processing items. Did you eventually process those items?
The items listed on the report, yes.
Okay. And you were referring to a different CC number. Was that the stock or there were 2 firearms recovered and some marijuana in that case as well?
I don't recall. I don't know what the incident was, but there were 2 firearms involved, yes.
Did you examine those firearms?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And I'm going to approach Shaun and right with you. I'm going to show you what's been previously marked. Exhibit number 69. Recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And did you process that item?
Yes, I did.
And did you find any latent prints of that item?
No, I did not.
I'll show you this previously marked exhibit number 69. You examined that firearm?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you find any latent prints on that item?
Yes, I found 1 latent impression off the magazine.
Okay. And did the magazine have a latent print that was suitable for comparison?
No, it did not.
So just for the record, that is a 9mm handgun, is that right?
And it was a Brico Genesis.
And that's all the items you examined on that other case?
And there were also plastic bags that I had examined.
Okay. And were you able to determine whether or not there were any latent prints on those plastic bags?
There were no latent impressions recovered from the plastic bags.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Your excuse, thank you very much. Who's your next witness?
And this time they come over with
Who is your next witness?
DNA expert, Joe Ross.
Quickly, you need to say anything? I'm sorry. Call the witness, please.
I'm going to call Joe Ross.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to this court and the jury and the issue between the Commonwealth and the defendant shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Please.
Sir, elected voice, could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury, spelling your last name for the record?
My name is Joseph Ross. Last name is spelled R-O-S-S.
What do you do for work, sir?
I'm a criminalist in the Boston Police Department in the DNA section.
And how long have you been a criminalist at the Boston Police Department?
A little over 9 years now.
What's your specialty?
I do perform DNA testing. My specialty is performing DNA testing in the DNA section.
And what sorts of education have you received?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Molecular and Cell Biology from the University of Connecticut. I have a Master of Science in Forensic Science from the University of New Haven.
What sorts of training and experience have you received since working at the Boston Police Department?
The training to become a DNA analyst is pretty extensive. It's at least a 6-month training. For me, it was about 6 months. It involves performing all the possible procedures and protocols that you'd perform on DNA casework, and then you're given a competency test at the end. I'm also required to have continuing education every year, at least 8 hours of continuing education every year. Typically that involves going to a conference, learning about new technologies in the field of forensic DNA.
Have you received any training outside of the Boston Police Department?
Yeah, so that's typically the conferences or trainings at other labs, being kept up to date on new technologies, things like that.
Is the Boston Police Department an accredited lab?
We are.
And what does that mean?
Accreditation is where an outside accrediting body comes in and they basically audit us. They look at our case files, they observe us in the lab, they look at our procedures, our protocols, and they make sure that everything we're doing is up to the quality that it should be. We were first accredited in 2002, and we've maintained that accreditation ever since.
What do you do specifically to test an item for DNA?
So we use what we call reagents or liquid chemicals. Basically what we try and do is break open any cells that are on a sample. So inside of the cell is the DNA. We try and break open any cells that are there. We then determine how much DNA we have, if we have any DNA. We amplify the sample. We zoom in on certain locations that we know. People are variable in the population. Their DNA varies at these locations. And then we observe the DNA profile that we generate and determine if we can make conclusions or not.
The human DNA chain is, if I remember from biology, is 23 chromosomes.
Correct.
How many different locations are there for DNA?
So the kits that we use test for 16 different locations. Theoretically, there's hundreds of locations that could possibly be tested for.
And there's partly statistics involved in making a determination about DNA, is that right?
Yes, there are population geneticists that determine the more rare or the locations that have more rare DNA characteristics or have more options for DNA characteristics and are more variable amongst the population. So basically what we're trying to do is separate people based on their DNA profile, or we can include and exclude people as a possible source of DNA left at a scene or on a piece of evidence.
So you look at the 16 specific areas of somebody's particular DNA.
Yes.
And then within that particular, say, let's just do 1 through 16. I know that they're not 116, but if we did 116, if we look at DNA section number 1, are there subsections within that section as well?
Yeah, so at each location there are a number of DNA characteristics that you can inherit from your parents. So you get half of your DNA from your mother and half from your father. So each individual is going to have 2 DNA characteristics at every location. There are a number of possibilities for those DNA characteristics, and that can help individualize people based on their DNA.
So at one particular site, you could have the probability of a match. There could be lots of different numbers that could go into that probability.
Yes.
At one particular site.
One location may have, just for example, one location may have 20 possibilities of DNA characteristics, and you're going to have 2 of those possibilities. The next location may have 20 possibilities for DNA characteristics, and you'll have 2 of those. So you can see the more locations that we test, the more individualized your DNA profile becomes.
And then as it goes from the 1 to the 16 spots, if you have 16 spots of the source and of the individual, the probability of that combination coming from a different person becomes very large.
Correct.
In this particular case, were you tasked with analyzing some evidence that was taken from a jacket?
Yes.
On my approach? I'm going to show you this was previously marked as number 61, black jacket. Were you asked to do some further testing on this particular jacket?
So I have not seen this jacket specifically. I was given a swab of the jacket from criminalist Jacqueline Masua. So she would have done the evidence examination on the jacket. She would have taken a swab from the jacket and then sent that on to DNA for me to test.
And that particular would be wearer DNA, is that right?
Correct.
Right, and that goes to a particular location of the jacket where there's a high probability that there is some contact between the person wearing the item and the item itself?
Yes, the swab was taken from the interior cuffs and collar of the jacket. If you think about the clothes you're wearing right now, your cuffs are typically rubbing against your arm, your collar is typically rubbing against your neck, and the idea being that skin cells are going to rub off onto, in this case, a jacket, onto those areas, and those areas are going to kind of grab those skin cells, and hopefully we can generate a DNA profile from those cells.
And the skin cells have DNA that you can then extract, take those 16 locations from potentially.
Yes.
And based upon a court order for this case only, did you have Mr. Harrison's DNA to make a comparison?
I don't know if it came into the laboratory or not. I don't know if it was submitted to the crime lab. I did not test any what we call known references or DNA samples taken directly from an individual. Typically when we do our DNA testing, if we get a profile that's suitable for comparison, we will then test a known sample. So typically in the form of an oral swab taken directly from somebody, a swab of someone's cheek. When we process that sample, we know that that's that person's DNA profile. We can then compare that to the evidence DNA profile, and we can make some conclusions about the DNA profiles. In this case, I did not test any reference samples.
Okay. Did you test the samples that you received from criminalist Jackie Masua that had taken samples from that jacket?
Yes, I tested a swab of the interior cuffs and collar of the jacket.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile based upon the samples from that jacket that Jacqueline Masua gave?
We did generate a DNA profile, yes.
And what type of profile did you generate? What type, not, check that. What was the DNA that you found on this rare DNA sample?
So the profile that I developed was what we call a mixture. So remember I was talking about how at every location you're going to have two DNA characteristics, one that you inherited from your mother and one that you inherited from your father. In this profile, I saw some locations that had as many as 7 DNA characteristics. So what that means to me is it's a mixture of at least 4 or more individuals. If you think of, a mixture can happen in many different ways. If I take a sip of a water bottle and someone else takes a sip from the water bottle and we swab that, there's a decent chance that we're going to get both of our DNA profiles in there. In this case, the jacket was a mixture of at least 4 or more individuals. Due to the fact that it is a very complex mixture, it's low level, there's not a ton of DNA there from the 4 individuals or more individuals, the DNA profile is considered unsuitable for comparison.
If you had, say, like 100 people's DNA, would you be able to make a comparison?
I would never, so we look at the DNA profile from the swab from the jacket and make our conclusions on that first. So my conclusion was that it's unsuitable for comparison. You could give me 100 oral swabs, 100 reference samples, I would never be able to make a comparison to this DNA profile that we obtained from the jacket.
So in essence, the results were inconclusive or not of a source enough for making any further testing?
Correct, yes. Just unsuitable for comparison. There would never be any conclusive decisions that I could make for comparison purposes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Excuse, there is a 20-minute break. We step down.